Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and this video is all about the running back position. We're going to do a tiered breakdown 1 through 50, and perhaps we divvy it up into a second parter, but for the most part, we're ranking every running back I think needs to be drafted in 2025. So no time to waste. Let's get it going. We're starting at the top in kind of a tier of his own, but mainly just because of the earned respect. I'm still going to rank Saquon Barkley as the RB1 this season. It's kind of hard to find a hole in the case for Saquon. Really, the only thing I can think of is being superstitious. There's the potential Madden curse and the fact that there hasn't been a repeat running back one in about a decade. But the situation for Saquon is pretty ideal. While he does lose Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator, you can probably expect more targets to go his way. So if you play in full PPR, I think he might gain a little bit of value. Kellen Moore doesn't really care about the running back in the passing game as much, and there's really nothing to scare you in regards to Saquon. The O-line is still excellent in Philadelphia. He had 2,000 rushing yards in 16 games last year, earned the right to sit out in Week 18, and there's really no red flags I can think of other than his age. He will be 28 entering this season, but we've seen plenty of running backs still play well at this age. I think he played just so well last season, I can't dismiss him, and I'm going to give him the earned respect. Maybe he doesn't finish as RB1, but the reason I'm ranking him at number 1 overall at the position is because I think he has the highest floor of any running back out there. I can't really envision a scenario where he's not top 5 at the end of the season unless he gets hurt. And that's an argument you can make for literally any player in fantasy football. Injuries are often random. I'm not going to be worried about it. I'm still going to have Saquon at number 1. But if you want to draft one of these players in the next tier above him, I understand, be my guest. They are younger, and that brings us to tier 2, the bust-proof running backs in year 3 of their career. At number 2, I have Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons, who will be 23 years old this season. And in the 3-game sample size with Michael Penix last year, Bijan was averaging 25.6 points per game. But 2 of those games did go into overtime. Darnell Mooney was absent for one of them, and the offense was pretty consolidated in favor of the running back, given Michael Penix was getting his first rookie starts of his career. So I wouldn't bet on 25 fantasy points for Bijan, but in the second half of last year, he really hit his stride. He was consistently giving you 20 fantasy points week in, week out, and I feel like at this point there is no reason to be worried. Bijan is good to go. He's clearly locked in to a workhorse role. So love Bijan. If you want to rank him at number 1, be my guest, but I'm going to give Saquon the earned respect as mentioned. So Bijan is at number 2. And at number 3, we have the player drafted right behind him 4 picks later, 3 years ago in the draft, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Also 23 years old. He has one of the safest floors in fantasy football. As David Montgomery turns 28, we expect his role to be increasing in the Lions offense. Now, it is concerning that Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, is gone. The elite play calling is probably going to take a back seat with the replacement. However, if David Montgomery stays fully healthy all year, there is a world where the elite upside we remember from Gibbs last season just never materializes. He was absolutely a league winner in the fantasy playoffs, averaging about 29 fantasy points per game. But if you look at the games before that, when Montgomery was on the field, his average did fall to 16.9 fantasy points per game in 13 weeks with Montgomery fully healthy. So if Montgomery stays on the field, that's one reason to be a little hesitant in the ceiling fully materializing for Gibbs. But at this point in his career, I expect some of the snap share to be more in his favor and for Montgomery to slowly be phased out of the offense just a little bit. But Gibbs is bust-proof. He was consistently a top 10 player last year, and you can usually bank on about 90 yards and a touchdown in this offense from Jahmyr Gibbs, even if he's getting an even touch split with Montgomery. So absolutely love Jahmyr Gibbs. There's no way I'm upset if I end up with Gibbs on my roster. An extremely safe pick. As I mentioned, this tier is bust-proof. So Saquon number 1, Bijan number 2, Jahmyr Gibbs number 3, and then I think you hit another tier entirely. I think the risk starts to creep in a little bit, but this is fantasy football. We're shooting for the highest upside possible in general, and we're trying to win. So no risk it, no biscuit, don't draft scared. At number 4, I have Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be 29 this year, and if you're afraid of the Achilles injury, then go ahead and pass, but I am not going to draft scared. The ceiling that McCaffrey has available to him is unlike any other player. Just 2 seasons ago, when he was fully healthy, he averaged over 22 fantasy points per game, and that would have been about 1.5 points more than Saquon on average, who did play a complete season last year as well. So I'm not going to be that worried about it. At running back 4, I'm a little hesitant to fully endorse him as locked in to league winner status, but I think the injury concerns are, worth this minor discount in price. Last year, we were drafting him at the 101. Now you can probably get him with like the 10th or 11th pick in your redraft league. So I'm not going to be that worried about it. All of the camp reports so far is that he's good to go. Granted, it's Kyle Shanahan's offense, and we usually get a lot of smoke screens from that organization. This offense is going to run through him. They got a lot of injuries at receiver, a lot of question marks there. Kittle is absolutely good to go, but beyond that, what are we getting from Brandon Ayuk? What are we getting from Ricky Pearsall? What about Juwan Jennings? Is he absolutely legit? All in all, it's more likely this offense still runs through McCaffrey. So he was kind of disappointing when healthy last season, only played 4 games, only averaged about 10 points per game, but he didn't score a single touchdown in that small sample size. And if you add that touchdown like he usually gets every week, then 16 plus fantasy points puts him in the tier of like running back 5 through 10. So I'm going to put him at the top. No other player I think has the option of finishing as the RB1 overall with over 22 fantasy points per game. McCaffrey usually is a league winner. It's just a question of will he be healthy. Some of you, though, may never draft him again after letting you down so badly last season. But I'm not going to write him off entirely. I'd like to draft his handcuff. I want Garendo on my bench, but I'm not afraid of taking McCaffrey at number 4. Then at number 5, with the Jonnu Smith trade, I've bumped up Devon Achane in my overall rankings. Achane has access to an equally high ceiling as just about every other player behind him. All he really needs is for Tua Tagovailoa to remain healthy. If we look at the 11 games last year where that was the case, Achane was averaging 19.5 points per game. That would have ranked as running back 3 just behind Jahmyr Gibbs. So he absolutely has that potential, and given his age at 23 years old, he played all of last season. The injury risk seems to have evaded him. In year 1, he was missing a lot of time, but I'm willing to write that off. It's kind of the same proposition as some of the other players behind him. Things could go south. It's definitely a concern, but I'm not going to let that prevent me from drafting a potential league winner. So Achane is my running back 5. There's also no real backup behind him that you're concerned about. Maybe Jalen Wright gets involved, but this target share in the Dolphins offense is pretty narrow. It's Tyreek Hill, it's Jalen Waddle, and then it's Devon Achane. Perhaps Darren Waller actually is a factor, but I'm not worried about him. And then Malik Washington is the only other name that may get some looks, but in general, not threatening the role that Achane plays in this offense. He can average about 7 targets per game if Tua is healthy. And one thing I'm actually a little bit more excited about if Tua goes down, he has a somewhat legit backup situation this year as opposed to last year. Last year it was a combination of Skylar Thompson, Tim Boyle, and Tyler Huntley, and the fact that there was never really a rhythm in that scenario, I think was one of the things holding back Achane. Now with Zach Wilson, say what you want about Zach Wilson, he's not going to win NFL games. But he also allowed Breece Hall to have an elite target share in that offense in the Jets 2 years ago, and Breece Hall went off in the passing game. So I expect a similar type of usage for Achane if that happens, and I think Zach Wilson can keep him viable. I expect Mike McDaniel to have this offense humming as it usually does. So I have Achane at number 5. 19.5 points per game as a potential value is something that you can't deny. So love Achane where he's currently going. If you can get him in round 2, that is perfect. But at number 6, I think you could argue for him at RB4. I got Derrick Henry, the ageless wonder, as my running back 6. If you're worried about his age, then go ahead and pass, but I think you're missing out on one of the safest floors other than guys like Saquon, Bijan, and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think the floor for Henry is much higher than Achane and McCaffrey. But at age 31, is he actually going to have a shot to be the RB1 overall? I'm not convinced that's the case. So he's probably the most likely to finish top 10, but if he finishes top 3 like he did last year, that'd kind of be a bit of a shock. He had 1,900 yards and like 17 touchdowns in the offense with Lamar Jackson. I think the touchdowns remain the same, but as he's a year older, I think with Keaton Mitchell in the backfield, they maybe give him the rock just a little bit less, try and keep him fresh for the playoffs. The Ravens are trying to win a Super Bowl. So this is one of the last years where I think Henry is like locked in to the top 6, but I think this is the lowest I can go in the rankings. I'm not afraid to draft Henry just because he's 31 years old. He's an athletic freak, and it seems like other than that 1 year with a foot injury, he never really gets hurt. So I trust him. We saw Gus Edwards score 13 touchdowns in Lamar's offense 2 years ago, and Derrick Henry is absolutely locked in to at least 13 touchdowns once again. So I'm not afraid to take him. Go ahead and grab him once Achane and McCaffrey are off the board, or take him above those guys if you're worried about the ceiling not working out for those other players. But Derrick Henry, number 6, feels like a safe call. At number 7, this might be a little bit high for some people, but I do believe Bucky Irving has access to the RB1 finish. And that's not something you can say for many other players. So I love Bucky Irving. He's my running back 7. And if you look at last season, his usage rate was actually really small. In the first 9 games of the year, he averaged about 45% of the snaps. And then when he took over above Rachaad White as the RB1 in Tampa, his snap share didn't really increase that much. It only jumped to an average of 55% in those 8 games as the clear starter. But in those 8 games, averaging 55% of the snaps, holy shit, he was productive. He averaged 21.9 fantasy points per game, which would have ranked as the RB1 if it was a full season. On a points per game basis, he was even better than Saquon. So given Liam Cohen is gone, there's a new offensive coordinator, and Bucky enters year 2, I would expect his snap share to increase. I think it's going to be at least 65% this season. And that means the touches will increase. Perhaps the efficiency goes down, but he was averaging 5.9 yards per carry in those 8 games I mentioned. And that's on the same level as Derrick Henry. He can break open a play from anywhere and score just about at will. Bucky Irving is fantastic. So he's another young player at 22.7 years old. I think he'll probably stay healthy. He's kind of got a smaller frame. Interesting that he was a day 3 pick, but he flashed so much upside. I would expect that to continue. So I'm going to trust Bucky Irving. I understand if you want to rank him a little bit lower, but I'm not going to be afraid. The potential is absolutely open to him. I think he could be a top 3 running back by the end of the season. Number 8 on this list, in the same tier, all of these players are interchangeable. 4 through 8, I kind of view as the exact same option overall. It's Ashton Jeanty, the rookie for the Raiders, drafted 6th overall. He's only 21 years old. He almost won the Heisman last year, and you know that the Chip Kelly, Pete Carroll offense is going to lean on him like crazy. So the volume is locked in. His backup is Raheem Mostert at 33 years old. I'm not worried about that. And I do think this offense is going to be much better than last year in Vegas with Geno Smith coming in at quarterback. But if you're concerned about the upside, let's take a look at the production last year for the Raiders running backs. Alexander Mattison was the main RB1. He was pretty brutal, averaged about 8 points per game on the season. But in his touch split with Amir Abdullah late in the year, Abdullah was actually a very valuable player. He helped me win the fantasy championship in the subscriber league. I did start him because I didn't have a good RB2, and Isaac Guerrero did miss some time. But in those final 4 games with Amir Abdullah, Abdullah was averaging 13 points per game. That was a top 20 running back overall. So that's the worst case scenario, but Ashton Jeanty is far, far better than Amir Abdullah. So I expect double-digit fantasy points. I think 15 points per game is probably the floor for Jeanty. But if we're going to be optimistic, let's take a look at the history of the Chip Kelly offense. Prime LaShawn McCoy in 2013 was an absolute stud and averaged 19 fantasy points per game in Chip Kelly's system. I think it's going to be a very similar scenario with Ashton Jeanty, and perhaps he doesn't fulfill all of the potential in his rookie season, but I think he's going to get close to it, and I think there's a shot we get close to like 16 and a half, 17 fantasy points per game from Jeanty, and that would absolutely rank as, at worst, an RB8 or top 10 option. I think Jeanty is a very, very safe pick, pretty much bust proof, and I don't think it's going to be like a CEH level disappointment that we're drafting in round 1 and never works out. So maybe I'm ranking him too low, maybe I'm ranking him too high, but I think at the bottom of this tier, on par with guys like CMC, Achane, Henry, and Bucky Irving, I think Jeanty is a perfectly fine pick, and if you need to reach on him to get him, if you really want him on your team, I'm not opposed to do that. But in redraft, I think I might expect a slightly slow start, and perhaps I want to rack up some more wins. I might trust guys like Derrick Henry on my team a little bit more. So take him if you want him. I think it's an equal trade-off between him and Derrick Henry, but if you wanted to rank Jeanty as high as RB4, I wouldn't look at you weird. I think that's a perfectly fine argument to make, but we've never seen it. That's why I have him at the bottom of this tier. I at least know the ceiling is absolutely there with guys like Bucky, Henry, Achane, and McCaffrey, but he's in the same tier. It's not that much different between these names. So that's my tier 3. Running backs 4 through 8, the no risk it, no biscuit tier. And then we enter tier 4, where I just can't really see them finishing in the top 5. I think there's really only health and touchdowns deciding that ceiling. Like, a bunch of other players would need to get hurt, and then these guys would have to score like at least 15 touchdowns for them to finish in the top 4 overall. But some of them had really, really productive seasons last year. And at RB9, I still believe that Josh Jacobs is going to be the focal point of the Packers offense. He's 27 years old, so maybe one of the older players, but still in his prime. The Packers went very run-heavy last year when Jordan Love suffered a groin injury, so perhaps if Love stays fully healthy, they might have more of a pass-first approach, and maybe some of those touchdowns for Jacobs do evade him. But some weeks he was scoring like 3 touchdowns, other weeks he wasn't getting in the end zone at all, and there was just a little bit more volatility from Jacobs than I may have liked to see. In redraft, I kind of want a little bit more steadiness out of my players, but I still expect a lot of usage for Josh Jacobs. He looked like the best player on their entire team last season, and I wouldn't really expect that to change just because they drafted Matthew Golden in the first round. So I absolutely trust him. I think Jacobs is a relatively bust-proof pick. I expect him to stay healthy, but at times he has gotten banged up in the past, and I think there is a slightly higher ceiling with the guys in the tier above him. So he's absolutely top 10. I kind of feel like I'm ranking him too low and being a little bit disrespectful. He scored 15 touchdowns last year, and I kind of don't think it's going to fall off further than like 12 or 13 this season. But I do expect just a slight dip in production. That's why I have him in the tier below. But still, an excellent pick. If you wind up with Jacobs as your RB1, you are living. You're in good shape. So don't be afraid to draft him, especially if you start off with like Saquon in round 1, get Jacobs in round 2. That's an excellent start. Going to be hard to beat that running back duo. But at number 10 in the exact same tier, I have Chase Brown. And in the 8 games without Zach Moss, Chase Brown was actually a true league-winning stud. He averaged 18.3 points per game. That would have ranked as running back 4 just behind Derrick Henry. And it was on pace with Bijan's entire season last year. So there's absolutely top 5 upside for Chase Brown. However, the backfield behind him is a little bit more crowded than it was last season. If you recall, last year Zach Moss started the season as the main guy, but by week 4, it was essentially Chase Brown's job. And then it took a little while for Zach Moss to get hurt, but once that happened, Chase Brown was the only option they really had, and he was getting peppered with targets every single week. He was a true stud in PPR leagues. So if you are in full PPR, maybe you'd rather draft Chase Brown than Josh Jacobs, but this channel is intended for half PPR, and that's why I only have him at RB10. But in the 11 games when he was the clear Cincinnati RB1, when Zach Moss took a back seat or just wasn't on the field, Chase Brown was actually scoring the exact same amount of points as Josh Jacobs last year. They both averaged 16.2 half PPR points per game, both getting about 20 plus touches per game. Chase Brown was catching more receptions, but the efficiency was slightly higher for Josh Jacobs. But they both scored touchdowns at a very high rate. I would expect that to continue, and it's why I have them back to back. I view them pretty much identical. However, Chase Brown did get injured at the end of the season. That is my tiebreaker. I think he has slightly more competition behind him, and perhaps coming off a high ankle sprain is not quite the same player. But I still think the ceiling is absolutely there. I'm not afraid to draft Chase Brown. And at RB10, I think he's a very valuable option. Definitely want him in round 3 if I can get him. Then at number 11, in the same tier as Jacobs and Chase Brown, I have Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. He's 26 years old, and he has finished a season in the past as the RB1 overall in fantasy. But last year, he suffered a high ankle sprain, which only forced him to miss 3 games. In general, a high ankle sprain is actually a very bad injury to have to deal with. It usually takes about 8 weeks in terms of the recovery timeline. So if you want to be graceful and give Jonathan Taylor the benefit of the doubt, let's look at the 8 games after his high ankle sprain and kind of remove that from the equation. He missed 3, and then 5 games he was in like a recovery timeline. He was actually really bad in those 5 games coming off of the high ankle sprain. He barely averaged 10 fantasy points in that stretch. But if you take it out of the equation entirely, I understand this is kind of like cherry picking, but look at the other 9 games when he was clearly fully healthy. Jonathan Taylor was the RB2 in fantasy. He averaged 19.8 points per game. If you had him in the fantasy playoffs, he was giving you like 30, 25 points consistently. He was a big reason why people won their fantasy championship if they had Taylor in the playoffs. But you can't forget those other 5 games and then the 3 games he missed as well. And it's been back-to-back seasons where he has missed time. He's actually been getting banged up consistently year over year. So that's my main red flag with Taylor. I would expect some injuries to crop up again. It just seems like a trend with him, and it's why I'd rather draft Chase Brown or Josh Jacobs. I just think they're going to be on the field a little bit more than Jonathan Taylor. But it could definitely work out where he doesn't get hurt and he should be ranked above them. You could argue for him as high as Christian McCaffrey or Achane as RB4, but I'm going to take a slight backseat on that. I would hesitate because of the quarterback situation. Whether it's Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson, this offense doesn't feel as good as some of the offenses we have ranked above them at the running back position. So a little bit worried about the quarterback play, but the play calling is elite. Shane Steichen, one of my favorite play callers overall, and I would still trust Taylor at the age of 26 to still put up pretty good numbers. So at running back 11, I think you're getting a steal with him at this range, but there's just so many good running backs. I have to rank some guys above him in the Colts offense. I do worry about some of the touchdown production, but I'm not going to be upset at all. If he's my running back 1, I generally trust Taylor quite a bit. Not going to be upset if that's who I get on my team. But after that, I think we're entering a new tier. While there is somewhat similar ceiling available to these players, the vibes just aren't perfect. There's also some red flags and some reasons to be concerned. I can see the path where they win you your fantasy league, but I can also see the path where they absolutely bust and you really regret these picks. But at number 12, a player I'm still pretty confident in is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. He's 25 years old, still on the rookie contract, and trying to get a contract extension that would pay him about 15, 16 million per year. I think the Bills are going to call his bluff. I really don't think he's going to get it. And I think because of that, he may be holding out deep into August, and that would be a bad scenario if that happens. In general, whenever we have players that hold out and miss training camp, they're not in the best shape when the season begins, and whether they miss time early on, have a slow start to begin with, or get hurt by like week 6, week 7, and miss time mid-season, there's usually just some red flags to be worried about in those scenarios. So perhaps the contract gets resolved by the end of July. We're not talking about it anymore. But with every passing day where he does not sign a contract and does not step back on the field, I'm a little bit less confident in James Cook. So last year, he scored 18 touchdowns in only 16 games. He has access to a league-winning ceiling. He can score 30 fantasy points in any given week. The Bills' offense is still one of the most prolific in the NFL. There's a lot of reasons to like him, but I'm also just a little bit worried he is not 100% to start the season, and it leads to diminished production that leads to maybe some L's in fantasy this season. So that's why I just can't rank him in the tier above, but there's absolutely a scenario where he crushes and puts up like top 7 numbers at the position this season. So the upside's absolutely there, but until he signs that contract, I just can't put him in the tier above. I would be a bit shocked if he scored another 18 touchdowns in 2025. But for him to score less than 12 would also be a shock. Similar to Derrick Henry, he probably is very, very effective in fantasy football. But I'm just worried about that contract. That's the red flag that puts him in this tier below. The vibes are just not perfect, as I mentioned. But at RB12, you're still getting a really valuable player. I would like to handcuff him to Ray Davis, though. I think Ray Davis is actually a very, very valuable backup in that offense. We've seen what he can do when James Cook is off the field. So maybe just have an insurance policy similar to Christian McCaffrey. I'd like to play it a bit safer if I draft James Cook, but can definitely work out, can definitely be the guy you need. Not going to be afraid to draft him if that's the best player on the board. Then at number 13, y'all might call me a homer, but as the weeks go by, I am drinking the Kool-Aid on Omarion Hampton. I think Omarion Hampton and the Chargers could be a true stud, especially if Najee Harris is not as big of a factor in that offense or just gets hurt. While we've never seen Najee Harris miss a game, it is still possible. And if Hampton has this backfield all to himself, he genuinely has access to 20 plus touchdowns in this Jim Harbaugh offense. Just look at Blake Corum out of Michigan 2 years ago. Scoring well over 20 touchdowns is possible in this system. Now, it's probably not going to happen. I would expect Najee to be involved in the timeshare, but they drafted him in the first round. This system in LA, it has a great offensive line. They added Mekhi Becton to play guard. We know they have elite tackles, and with better receiver depth, I think there's going to be fewer stacked boxes for the Chargers to deal with. So if you watch Omarion Hampton's highlight reel, you're going to see the potential. He bounces off defenders. He has so much lower body strength. He kind of reminds me of some Alvin Kamara highlight reels. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to tackle Omarion Hampton. But if you're worried about him, if you're saying this ranking is way too high, just look at what J.K. Dobbins was able to do last year. Dobbins averaged 13.5 fantasy points per game, and when Gus Edwards was off the field, that jumped up to 14.6. That would have ranked in the top 15 overall. So I think Hampton is better than J.K. Dobbins. I think he's going to stay healthy and remain on the field. And I think as we approach October, as the weeks go by, Najee Harris is just going to be phased out of the offense more and more. I think you have access to a absolutely elite ceiling with Omarion Hampton. If Najee becomes irrelevant due to injury or just game plan, Hampton, I think, could be a top 5 running back. I really, really believe that. But I am a Chargers fan. I want to let that bias be known. But still, I think Hampton is a true league winner and absolutely a player to target in your fantasy draft this season. I want him on my team. I just wish Najee Harris wasn't in the backfield alongside him. If that wasn't the case, I'd probably rank him alongside Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown. I think he'd be a clear top 10 running back. I have him at number 13, so I still think he's going to be great. I just worry a little bit. He has kind of a slow start and only averages like 15 touches in the month of September. So hoping for the best, but I genuinely don't want to miss out. I'm going to be trying to draft Hampton everywhere I can get him. Then at RB14, you might think I'm too low, but I'm a little bit worried about the other Los Angeles running back. We're talking about Kyren Williams of the Rams. He's going to be 25 by the end of the season, and I'm worried that this is more of a committee than it has been in the past. Last year, they drafted Blake Corum, who was pretty much irrelevant, and perhaps Blake Corum is just so much of a bust, but perhaps they don't trust Kyren as much. They drafted Jarquez Hunter in the 4th round as well, and that's going to be a concern. I don't think Kyren is going to see the exact same amount of volume that he's seen the last 2 years. I could be wrong, but he's also very reliant on touchdowns. He's not the most efficient running back, and many of his touchdowns not just come in the run game, but also the passing game. With the addition of Devontae Adams, that is a much bigger threat for touchdowns in this offense than Cooper Kupp. So I believe the Rams will be passing the ball a little bit more this season, and I also believe it's going to be a bit more of a committee in this Rams backfield. While I still think Kyren is a valuable piece to have, I still have him as a top 15 running back in the same tier as James Cook. You can draft him at RB12 if you want. I wouldn't draft him any higher than that. I'm just a little worried he disappoints you just a little bit. If his touchdowns diminish at all, you're going to be disappointed for sure. And then if the volume comes down and he's only averaging like 75 yards per game instead of 90, you will be very upset with his production profile. So I do think Kyren is a bit of a risky play. He obviously has access to an elite ceiling in the Rams offense, but I don't think it's critical to be drafting him above guys like James Cook and Omarion Hampton. I think he will fall off just a little bit this season. So there's also a contract dispute looming, and he probably gets an extension, but it's not guaranteed. They may move off of him, and perhaps he just gets hurt. It's been a while that he's missed time, but he was a 5th-round pick at the end of the day. He's not particularly fast, and I don't feel like he has excellent vision. It's mainly just been volume and touchdowns that's been carrying him in fantasy. So I think he's due for some negative regression, and that's why I'm kind of off of him this season. Still in the same tier as James Cook, could still absolutely crush, but in general, I'm more optimistic about Omarion Hampton than I am Kyren Williams, and Hampton goes like a full round later. I'm generally passing on Kyren myself. So if you prefer him, be my guest, go ahead and take him, but I'm just a little bit worried. I don't think I'll be targeting him as much as other people. Last player in this tier, though, I still believe Joe Mixon is a very valuable piece to have, and he ranks as my running back 15 this year in fantasy. The vibes are not perfect. We're going to mention that again. He's going to be 29 years old this season, and he usually misses about 3 or 4 games. Last year, he did miss some time. We saw Cam Akers as the backup behind him. They brought in Nick Chubb. I'm not worried about Nick Chubb. That's not really a genuine threat, but they also drafted Woody Marks, and then technically Dameon Pierce is still on the roster. But in general, Joe Mixon is probably going to give you about 19, 20 touches per game when healthy, and he was very productive behind a shaky O-line last season. I think with the new offensive coordinator coming from the Sean McVay coaching tree, there's going to be more production overall in this offense. But they also brought in 3 new pass catchers, and CJ Stroud is looking to bounce back. I'm worried they also throw the ball a little bit more than they did last season. But in general, Mixon is a very safe running back 2 with top 10 potential. He was that last season, and it wouldn't surprise me that much if it happened again. He's going to be 29 years old, but still, I don't think the cliff is going to hit this year. I think he has 1 more year left in the tank of fantastic fantasy production, and I'm genuinely tempted to rank him above all the other players in this tier. I almost put him at RB12, but at RB15, he probably has more injury risk than the other guys in this tier. So I'm still comfortable drafting him for sure. Not going to be afraid of it at all. But at age 29, he's probably deserving of the last ranking in this tier. Next, we're going to drop down a tier, and there's still fantastic upside with all these players. They could all absolutely be top 10 players, but it probably is not going to happen. It's very tempting to trust him. I think I'm still going to roll with Alvin Kamara at number 16. Kamara is a little bit risky because Kamara is going to be 30 years old this season, but he was so good last year. He was a top 5 running back on a points per game basis, but he also missed the final 3 games with a groin injury, and with Kellen Moore joining the team, I would be worried that his target share does come down a little bit. The quarterback situation is also pretty much up in the air. We're expecting it to be Tyler Shuck, and regardless of who it is, it's kind of a worst case scenario once Derek Carr retired. So that's definitely a red flag, a cause for concern, but Kamara is still absolutely one of the most talented players in the NFL at the running back position. It's just a question of, will he stay healthy? Will he get the same amount of touches? But for the most part last year, he helped you get to the fantasy playoffs. And in this tier, I think he has access to one of the highest ceilings remaining in fantasy football. So if you want to rank him lower, I understand, but I really think all these guys I'm about to mention between RB 16 and 20 are all equally as valuable as each other. But last year, the track record for Kamara was just so good, I can't pretend like he's not valuable. He averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game. That was better than Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, James Cook, Kyren Williams. Pretty much almost every running back I've mentioned up in this list above him, other than Derrick Henry, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan, and Saquon. So RB5 is something I just can't dismiss. I'm worried he misses time, but just like Joe Mixon, it's probably not more than 3 or 4 games, and it's probably still a good enough ceiling to warrant the risk. But I get it if you want to pass. There are some people who really discount Kamara this season, but in redraft, I think there's a pretty safe path for success. I don't think I'm going to panic too much on his age. But at number 17, you probably have been wondering where this guy was in the rankings. It's Breece Hall of the New York Jets. At age 24, he's still a very valuable asset to have. He's the number 2 target in his offense. Granted, the quarterback doesn't throw it as much. Justin Fields might be running it in himself. And that's why I'm going to hit the panic button a little bit. Last year was pretty terrible for Breece Hall. We expected a top 3 season from him. We drafted him with a supreme amount of confidence, and he just let everyone down. I was one of the people who got burned. I drafted him on one of my teams, and he was a massive disappointment. So I'm really worried about this Jets offense in general. I don't see them scoring a ton of points. I'm worried that Justin Fields doesn't throw him the ball as much, but still, he's a really talented option, and he's going to get probably like 18 touches per game. However, there have been some reports by legitimate reporters such as Albert Breer that Braylon Allen is actually going to get a lot more touches in this offense than he did last year. So if it's more of a committee, that's a major red flag, but the athleticism and overall profile for Breece Hall is one I can't fully dismiss. I still think he's a very talented player. It's just a question of what will the volume look like? So there's a world where he finishes top 10. I just don't really see it happening. I would bet against it. And he's going as like running back 13, 14 off the board. I got him at number 17. In general, I think he's going about a round too early. I'm usually passing on Breece Hall, and there's rarely anyone who's willing to let him fall back around to me. So I have not drafted Breece Hall very much. I'm not going to change that. I think he's more of a risk factor than a guaranteed producer, and I just don't really believe, after watching him last year, that he's actually as good as the hype would indicate. So it's really just the team he plays for. If he played for like the Rams or the Colts, I would probably rank him top 12, but he doesn't. So that's why I'm going to pass on him most likely this season. Breece Hall does scare me quite a bit. And just like Alvin Kamara, I think there is a scenario where he really lets you down. But for him, I don't think it's due to injury. I think it's just because of the usage rate and lack of efficiency, a lack of touchdowns in the Jets offense. So good luck if you trust him. I do not. I'm probably going to pass on Breece Hall myself. But at number 18, right behind him, I have Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers, and Chuba's going to be 26 this season, but he had a breakout season last year and signed an extension. There is really no reason to be worried about his role. If he stays healthy, he probably gets another 20 touches per game, just like last year, and the offense, I think, will be improving with the addition of Tedrow and McMillan. I think they're going to be scoring more touchdowns, settling for fewer field goals, and I'm not too worried about Rico Dowdle in this backfield behind him. While Dowdle is a much better backup than he had last season, I still think Chuba's role on the depth chart is secure. And in general, I believe Dowdle is more of a pass catcher. Chuba doesn't really rely on receptions as much as some of these other players in this tier. So I expect the touchdowns to continue. I expect his role to remain just as high. And I think he has about a floor, about 18 to 20 touches per week. That is very valuable. I think he's probably the most bust-proof option in this tier. But if he finishes top 12, I would be kind of shocked. Like, I think there's kind of higher upside with Kamara or Breece Hall on a per-game basis. But Chuba is probably the more guaranteed high-end floor play of this group. So if you want to draft him above Kamara, be my guest. I'm tempted to rank him above Breece Hall as well, but in the Panthers offense with a more legit backup, I have him behind those two guys just barely. It's kind of the same proposition. If I wind up with Chuba instead of Kamara, I'm probably in a safer spot, but I think the ceiling is just a little bit diminished compared to Kamara and Breece Hall. But at RB18, not going to be upset at all if he's on my roster. Definitely comfortable drafting him in round 5, where he goes on Underdog in a regular redraft league with only 2 wide receiver format. He's probably going to go in round 4. But at number 19, I got Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks, and I've been reluctant to draft him on the live stream. If you've been watching my streams, Walker is rarely a player I am clicking, and it's because of the injury risk. He's repeatedly coming off the field, and he has one of the best backups in all of the NFL. Zach Charbonnet is absolutely legit, and Charbonnet ends up putting up better numbers when he's the starter compared to Walker when he's the RB1. Granted, Charbonnet doesn't have a backup behind him. He's getting a lot more snap share when he's the starter. Walker does have to compete with Charbonnet, and that's the main reason I'm also worried. Like, even if he doesn't get hurt, how much is he competing with Charbonnet for touches, especially in the passing game? That is a big factor. Even though Walker was getting a shit ton of receptions last year, his usage on the ground was kind of inconsistent. Some weeks he was a 25 touch workhorse, other weeks he was barely getting like 16, and it was kind of random when it worked, when it didn't. And I'm kind of worried that Sam Darnold is actually a downgrade at quarterback in the Seahawks offense. So I have some concerns. In general, I think Walker has more injury concerns than anything else, and that's the main reason I pass, but he's still a very talented player. It wouldn't shock me entirely if he finished top 12, but in order for that to happen, I think Charbonnet would have to get hurt and Walker play an entire full season. I doubt either of those scenarios happen. So at running back 19, you can rank him higher if you prefer, but I'm just a little bit skeptical. I'd rather have Chuba, I'd rather have Kamara, and I'd rather have Breece Hall. I'd rather have Joe Mixon as well. But last player in this tier, probably the last player of this video, will hit the rest in part 2. I have James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals as my running back 20. Could finish top 10, but probably won't in the same tier. I could rank him as high as 16 and make an argument for it. But just like Alvin Kamara, the age is a factor. He's going to be 30 years old this season, and he is still yet to play an entire season, all 17 games. But last year, he was healthy for the most part. He was very efficient. He's usually pretty underrated, and I kind of feel like he's a major value where he's going in drafts. But there's also the risk that Trey Benson is much more of a factor in this offense. Granted, Benson was terrible last season. I'm not that worried about it. I'm kind of just off of the Cardinals offense in general. I think they're not as good as some people claim, and I do think Benson will be a little bit more involved. I also think more touchdowns are going to be going to Trey McBride than last season. So maybe Marvin Harrison also scores more touchdowns, but I think James Conner probably doesn't score as many touchdowns as he did in 2024. So hopefully he can stay healthy, but at age 30, just like Alvin Kamara, it's a bit of a concern. And while all these 5 players are interchangeable, I do have Conner at the bottom of this tier. I still think he's a good name to target. I still think he's pretty valuable. And last season, he was much better than this overall. He finished with an average of 14.6 fantasy points per game. That was tied with David Montgomery for running back 13 on a points per game basis. And it was just behind Devon Achane, just above of Chuba Hubbard and Kenneth Walker. So absolutely deserving to be in this tier with those other names. But because of his age and some overall concerns with his backups, I have him at the bottom. RB20, though, is still very valuable. Definitely a name I'm comfortable drafting for sure. So that's going to be it for this video. Here on the screen are my top 20 running backs in part 1 of this rankings video. We have Saquon Barkley at number 1, followed by Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. Then in tier 3, we have Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, Bucky Irving, Ashton Jeanty. And then in tier 4, we have Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Jonathan Taylor, followed by the tier of James Cook, Omarion Hampton, Kyren Williams, Joe Mixon. And then to round it out in tier 6, Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Walker, and James Conner in the top 20. I think these are the running backs you want the most. Definitely going to help you compete in fantasy, but there's still some valuable names left available on the board. We'll get to running backs 21 through 40 in the next video if you don't want to miss out. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you're updated on all of my new content. And if you enjoyed this video, if you made it this far, make sure you hit the like button. Hope you enjoyed. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.